It has never been harder to be a manager in football. Nowadays, you're only one game away from getting the sack.
But the question we're asking this week is, should managers always take the blame? The Premier League is often described as a merry-go-round of managers, and the statistics would appear to back that up. On average, a manager in the Premier League lasts for 1 year and 9 months, although 40% of managers in the Premier League last less than 6 months. So is it really the manager's fault, or is the players to blame? Should they be taking more account here?
Do you know what? I find those statistics fascinating because, I'm just sitting there thinking, 1 year and 9 months, it must be the fact that you've got Pep, Arteta, Eddie Howe and a couple others who are long-standing managers that bring those statistics right up. Because when you compare it to your Forest, Wolves, teams that are literally going through manager after manager. And actually, I'm also thinking of your team, Chelsea. What's your view? You know, you've had a lot of managers. You're currently with Rosenior. Where do you see things at? Is that the right call to have changed so many managers?
I think each manager is different. Each case is different. If we're talking about the current Chelsea, as they are at the moment, if you are going to blame Liam Rosenior for the debacle in the Parc des Princes, it is the most simplistic, easiest thing to do to blame Liam Rosenior there, because there is so much going on at Chelsea, and Chelsea have made this so complicated. They have 2 sporting directors there who, from the outside looking in, seem to rule the roost. If things go well, they're puffing their chests and going, look what we've done. If things go badly, it's Enzo Maresca's fault, he needs to go. You also have a medical department there that Enzo Maresca kind of alluded to when he was in charge, that were effectively telling him when he could and couldn't play players, backed up by the sporting directors. So when you sit there and you point the finger at Maresca or you point the finger at Rosenior, you don't get the full picture of what's going on beneath. Also, what you've got is a group of young players there on very long-term contracts. Do they become complacent if they've got those long-term contracts? That game against PSG was a fundamental example of a group of very talented youngsters with absolute naivety at the core of them because they haven't got that experience. Can you blame Rosenior for that? No. So the knee-jerk reaction of the entitled fan who has seen their team win the Champions League twice, seen the win at Premier League medals, let's blame the manager, let's get him out. What I am saying is we got to look a little deeper here.
I totally agree that it's not his fault entirely. However, I do believe that the manager plays his part, of course. I believe that the players play their part. And then the sporting directors, as you mentioned, and the owners and the recruitment and everyone else who, it's a whole club, right? For me, I look at it and go, the whole team wins, the whole team loses. Everyone needs to take responsibility. What we often see from a fan's perspective or a media perspective is it's all eyes on the manager. But actually, as you've alluded to there, who recruited these players in the first place? So Liam Rosenior walks into a dressing room with players that are already there in place. They've already played a certain style of football under Maresca, and he's now given the onus of improving things, getting results, getting the respect of the players, and doing that in a real short space of time. It's a tough job for a manager with 2 sporting directors looking over your shoulder. The amount of teams I've been at where politics have been involved in the team selection, it's insane. I absolutely hated it as a player, still hate it now as a coach. It's the ugly side of football that's just not spoken about. People are aware of it, but it's just not spoken about. When you look at the likes of Forest, you look at the likes of Spurs, is that they're changing managers, but the results are still the same. So doesn't that mean that there's another issue there? Where do the players come into this? How much accountability do you believe as players that they should take?
Yes, of course. And I would use another team maybe, and we can talk tactics forever, but let's talk about Man United. Ruben Amorim proved he was a manager and a good manager. He did that in Portugal. He comes to Manchester United and he cannot get a tune out of those players. It might have been about his system. He might have been inflexible. But I got the feeling watching that the players didn't believe in what they were doing, and therefore they didn't play to their potential. And Carrick comes in, suddenly They're world beaters. Same group of players. Do they hang their heads in shame in the way they played under Amorim because they weren't giving everything? Or is that purely down to the manager?
Do you know what? That's what makes it such a great debate, because it's such a tough call. Because part of me sits there and goes, well, what was the manager like as a person? What was Ruben Amorim like as a person? Because we can use the Rashford example, and I'd look at that and go, he wasn't a very good manager. You then also look at it and go, Rashford needs to take some responsibility. He's no longer a kid. He's a grown man, for sure. But regardless of that, I do look at that situation and go, I'm not sure he handled that too well. So then I question, okay, did he handle it well with some of the other players? Not from the outside looking in, because he so often spoke in the media about this being the worst team. This is the worst United team. So as a player, you've got two ways to react, right? One, I'm going to show you that we're certainly not. Or, I'll tell you what, I'm no longer a fan of you. I'm going to wait until you're out. Now, I'm not agreeing with that at all, by the way. I'm not. You sign a contract, you're a professional, you're there, you're committed to the club. You know, the fans are there, turn up every week expecting you to perform to the best of your ability. That's the very least you can do, right? It's give your all. That doesn't mean you're going to play well every week. You know, form is temporary, class is permanent. I'm a big believer in that. But your effort is something that's well within, you know, your control. And I do believe the players at United should be held accountable for their performances. And I think there were times, not with all players, but with some players looking there, that the players weren't given 100%. And for me, that part is inexcusable.
Let's talk about Wolves. Kilman, Neto, Lamina, Cunha, Aitnouri, Sarabia, Semedo, Strand Larsen bought and sold for a £25 million profit over 7 months, right? They have sold all these players, Wolves. They start the season badly because they've sold all these players. Suddenly it's the manager's fault. Well, hang on a second. You've just sold all my best players from out from under me. No, but it's your fault, says the owner, because they think they know more about football than the manager. And what happens is Pereira goes on and gets a job with Forest. You could say frying pan and fire at that point, but that's another debate, isn't it?
It is. I think it's a really good point that you make about the owners who don't necessarily know too much about football. Just to go back to Chelsea and look at what Todd Boehly said recently, he had no idea who he was signing at that time, whether they were good or bad players. But if Manchester City wanted Cucurella, Todd Boehly wanted Cucurella, because that meant to him that he must have been a good player. So that's a perfect insight there of top businessmen, super successful businessmen inside the football world not really having a clue. So then what they do is they bring in sporting directors. And for me, that's a really tough job to do without having played the game. I'm sorry, I'm all for coaches who have gone the hard way and the long way around and not played the game but studied for years and then become top coaches. I'm all for it. But the sporting director role, I really feel it should be for someone who has experienced either playing or coaching, because otherwise they've got no real idea of what it's like in either shoes. And I just feel like to then be at the top and be managing all of that, to be pulling the strings, I think is a really, really, really difficult environment that is then created. And it then takes away the power from the manager. Because could you imagine being a manager wanting to sign certain players, wanting to sell certain players, wanting to make decisions around the starting 11, but then having someone on your shoulder going, that's not possible. This is the way we're going, and this is the way you're going to make it work, or you will be gone. And it can be as brutal as that.
I think if we go back to Alan Mullery, who used to say, you know, if they start chanting at the manager, the owner knows the next thing they're going to be doing is throwing stones at them. So it's a better way. I don't want the heat on me, so let's get rid of the manager. In the same way as it's much cheaper for a club to sack a manager than it is to sack 22 players and start again. So it's always going to be the manager, isn't it? And you must have been in dressing rooms where there's 3, 4, maybe 5 bad apples in there that are ruining the club. Yet the club will never get rid of them, because otherwise their resale value will go down and they will lose a lot of money. So what they do is they sack the manager and hope the new one can kick these new players into order. and the club will go again. So the players are protected, aren't they? That's got to be fundamentally wrong, isn't it?
It is, and I feel this is something that's happened recently because, if you go back 10 years or so when I was playing in the Premier League or the Championship, I can assure you it was a very different environment. It was a case of the manager made the decisions. If the players weren't on board with that, the players were out. It wasn't a case of, I'll tell you what, you just sit and wait here for the next manager to go, because that wasn't the case. I would love to know the average back then of Premier League managers, because I'm just off the top of my head when I think back to your Wengers, your Sir Alex Ferguson's, your David Moyes. I felt like he was at Everton forever. You had managers that were around for a long, long time. And I knew as a player, I can absolutely assure you of that, as a player, I always felt that if I don't get on with the manager, I'm going to have to move, not the other way around. And I was at times, one of the bad eggs. I was frustrated. I didn't like this manager. I'm not playing. I don't like this. I packed my bags. I was gone. I was moved on, and rightly so. But I just feel over time we've taken away that authority from managers, and it's left them in such a difficult situation that now they're there going, okay, I've got to protect the players, but at the same time I've got the sporting director to deal with, and then above him I've got the owner to deal with, and then of course I've got the fans and the media breathing down my neck. I'm sure it's an extremely lonely place, and as an assistant coach, I can see it, from not too far away, how difficult the job actually is.
Well, I'm hearing all of this now, Stephen, and I'm beginning to think if I was a manager, and thank goodness I'm not, there's just too many variables involved here. It's not just about getting a win on a Saturday afternoon. It's the biggest job for a manager nowadays, having to deal with egos, I think. Forget the tactics, it's egos.
It's a really, really tough job. And as you mentioned there's so many things that go on behind the scenes that I think people are unaware of. I was actually unaware of it as a player, to be honest with you. I didn't quite consider how many things go into each decision, because it's so easy to think as a player, it's all about me. Why am I not playing today? I'm not thinking about, well, actually, he's got 3 games coming up this week. He's got to play that player because the sporting director signed him and he's putting pressure on him, and that agent's calling and this agent's calling, and all the rest of the politics that come with it. So often as players, we're looking at it going, I just want to play. Why am I not playing? And actually, I think then as a fan's perspective, things can be frustrating, of course, because when the results don't match up to the talent that's in the squad, you are held accountable. I think managers are under extreme pressure to manage the whole club, right? To make sure that everybody is in line and then get results. It's a tough job, but of course, at the top, they're paid extremely well for it. As we discussed on our other episodes about our footballers paid too much money, we didn't mention the coaches. And actually lower down, they've still got the same job, but much, much lower wages.
That was a little plug for coaches all around the world, especially in Turkey. I wonder if you've ever been in a dressing room where you've walked in and actually been shocked that the manager has been sacked because you thought he shouldn't.
Rob, I'm going to come back to you in just a second. Before I do that, if you're enjoying the show, please don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on Are Managers Always to Blame? Right, back to your question, Rob. Yeah, there's a few examples I can give you. Kolo Toure at Wigan. I played with him at Liverpool. I felt that he's a good guy with a good connection. Okay, I want to make that decision to go and work with him. And then I think, 6, 7, 8 days later, he's sacked. And it was just like, I couldn't wrap my head around it. We had one decent away game to Cardiff, which we drew, then lost in the cup midweek, which I was unable to play in. And then I made a mistake against Luton in the league game. And we unfortunately lost 2-0. And that evening I get a phone call from Kolo, and he's gone. And I felt absolutely terrible because I didn't feel Kolo was to blame, and I felt that he was the man to have potentially kept us up that season. And then I also had another experience, well, actually quite a few experiences over in Turkey where I had 4 different coaches in one season, 3 different coaches in another season, and it was just a constant merry-go-round. And that isn't easy as a player because we just struggle to find the consistency. And
we kind of come full circle here, because if we're saying perhaps it's not always right that the manager takes the blame, what is always seems to be right is the players never take the blame. A player is never sacked. So why can't football clubs just turn around and go, actually, Steven, you were dreadful in that game. You're sacked. Off you go.
I want to protect the players here, so I want to argue, no. Listen, it's a supply and demand business, I guess. I mean, players are brought to clubs, and at that time, you usually have interest from a couple of teams, so they compete in, and it's like, well, which team's offering me the most money with the most security, so that the longer length contract with the manager that has the right idea, or the idea that suits me best and the other players best. That's often what goes into a player's head. So if you then add in the possibility of that contract being torn up, I feel that most players would opt to go somewhere else. And in such a competitive market, I believe that's why we have the inflation. That's why the inflation is what it is. And some clubs are paying above average for players because they need that security. I do want to add that there are cases where players are given contracts that are pay-as-you-play. So if you've had a long-term injury and you're, say, a high risk, clubs do say, right, we're going to give you a pay-as-you-play contract. So your contract could be zero or very minimal basic wage, and then it would be, right, if you play, you'd have a lump sum for each game. You then also have other ones that are very incentive-based. So it can be if the club finishes in the top four, if you are sold, then you'll be given 20, 25, 30% of that contract.
So what you're saying is, unless all the clubs sign up to that, there'll always be another club who is willing to give you that guarantee. And the problem is if you sack £100 million player, you've just lost 100 million there, because he's then free to sign for whatever he wants for nothing. And that is financial madness. What we have debated is should managers always take the blame? And there's so many variables here. I don't think we should be feeling too sorry for these managers, though, Steven, because I have seen the figures that Jose Mourinho has got just on payouts alone. Not what he's earned in the manager's job, but just for compensation for not doing his job as well as the club wanted him to do, which is it's an incredible figure. So I'm kind of, there's part of me that's feeling sorry for managers, but no, I'm not too sure.
It's a Jose Mourinho is the special one, and when you are at his level and you have his pedigree, and of course clubs will be desperate to sign him and others like him, they would then offer larger incentives, which would be if we do sack you, we'll potentially pay the remainder of your contract. But in most cases, it's 3 to 6 months of your contract. So if I'm let go here in Turkey, I won't be swimming in cash for the next 5 to 10 years. It will be a case of you're covered for, I said, usually 3 to 6 months on average. And then I said, if you're a special case, you may be granted a little bit more. But for those lower down, it could be very, very tricky, because as I said, you're not given the rewards that people think you are given as a manager.
Okay, thanks very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this particular episode.
Thanks very much. We'll see you next time.